It's not you putting your imprint on the company itself. Because if you try to do that, it'll come across as fake. The company it has a culture. And that culture will be articulated by the people who built the culture. I think the first iteration of your core values is almost more a reflection of the company with a little bit of influence and almost prescriptive aspect of what is a CEO. You want to make sure you communicate and what you don't. It's not you putting your imprint on the company itself. Because if you try to do that, it'll come across as fake. And because the culture was so tight, we thought it was really important to get to know folks and for them to get to know us. And I mean, some of the employees were, because they were very confident and knew each other, were very transparent with us and said, hey, what the heck do you guys know about dental? What do you know about software? And we told them, as much as we've learned in the last 3 months. There was really that aspect of coming in, not pretending to be someone you're not, that I think was critical in terms of building the trust in the culture. It's like no one expects you to be, a rock star day one in an industry, particularly in a company where people sometimes work 20 years, but they expect you to acknowledge the fact that they have all of the experience and the knowledge and you have very little. And so you're going to work together to go build things. So being very transparent and humble about what you know, I think was really, really critical. And I think in building those relationships, investing in time to get to know people, why they enjoy what they do, what they like about the company, to understand the strength of the culture beyond the 60 to 90 days we spent during the diligence process to really understand what makes people tick. Fundamentally, culture is best administered, evaluated, and delivered at the smallest kind of level, most local level. And so really figuring out those are the people that are fundamentally setting the culture. They are barometers, I would say, where things are wrong and where situations that are culturally inconsistent with what you want. And then it helps you remain informed. And as you scale, it's the most uncomfortable thing. CEOs are all control freaks, the good ones are. And so as you get to larger things, you have to kind of trust and you have to be able to focus your efforts and time on making sure that the culture that you want to build sustains, even though you don't know everybody.
This is the Business Philosopher with Uni podcast. I'm your host, Bhavesh Naik. On this podcast, we explore a simple idea that every successful organization is built on a philosophy, whether it's consciously designed or not. And when that philosophy is human-centered, organizations have a chance to become self-sustaining, able to grow beyond the founder. But that raises a more difficult question. What happens when the person leading the organization is not the one who built it? When you inherit a culture instead of creating it, when the values, the norms, the way of operating were already there, can you truly lead that culture, or are you always borrowing something that was never yours? Eric Giesecke is the CEO of Planet DDS, a cloud-based dental software company serving over 13,000 practices across North America. He stepped into the company in 2015 through a search fund acquisition, inheriting an existing team, culture, and operating system rather than building one from scratch. Over the past decade, he has scaled the organization from roughly 25 employees to nearly 350, navigating the challenge of earning credibility, shaping culture, and building a company that can grow beyond any one individual. I am pleased to have you on this podcast, Eric.
Thanks a lot for having me.
And a special shout out to you, our listener. Hey, listen, we're not just a podcast. We are a movement, and you are the business philosopher. We learn from each other and grow with each other. Please remember to like, subscribe, follow, share, and comment. But most important, ask and answer questions. Thank you for tuning in. So, Planet DDS. And you came to Planet DDS through a search fund acquisition. So if you can kind of take us behind the scenes a little bit, how did you come upon this opportunity, and what were the circumstances that led you to it?
Yeah. So in a search fund is it's a single purpose vehicle intended to where an entrepreneur or a group of entrepreneurs raise some capital with the intention of going to find and acquire and run an existing business. So when you decide to take capital from a series of investors, you have to be open-minded about the type of business that you acquire because there are tons of opportunities out there, and none of the opportunities are going to line up exactly with anybody's background. And my background prior to that was running a bottleless water cooler company as part of the search fund model, and I was in international construction management, so nothing to do with dental and nothing to do with software whatsoever. So we had a buddy of mine that I grew up with, that I did it with, we had stumbled upon this business through a friend who had introduced it to us. And it was a very, very good company. Although we knew nothing about dental and neither of us were technologists. In a good company in the sense that it had a very, very kind of well-defined, stable product, good product market fit, but it really had a fantastic culture that was designed and kind of centered around a group of people that knew each other very well, but all really wanted to win. So we were very interested in the fundamental kind of aspects of the business and some of the industry trends and the product and all the things you need to think about. I think when you're evaluating a software business, but the thing that was very unique about this, and some of the people that of the founding team are still with the company today, it really was a strong culture, just really centered on wanting to be successful, with a sense of
Right.
kind of self-reinforcing accountability that was very powerful. So we were super excited about that.
Absolutely. And the company had about 25 people at the time.
Yep,
Is that
that's correct.
correct?
Yep.
Yeah. And you said the company had a strong culture. And, I talked to folks here on the podcast, and, a lot of they talk about acquiring a company. And when you acquire a company, when you bring a company in, they talk about blending in the culture. So every acquisition comes with a culture of its own, right? And they would have their own existing culture. You didn't have that. You stepped into the culture as a CEO, right? So now they talk about a bit of a tension when you have two cultures that come together. There's tension. Was there any tension when you stepped into the company, you and your partner, when you acquired this company? Was there any kind of an unease on their part, and maybe probably yours also a little bit, right?
Yeah, I would say maybe not as much tension as probably
Yeah.
apprehension. So
Ah,
I think
yes.
there's just a lot of distrust, right? So like when you have a group of people that have worked together for so long, and some of the people in the company had worked at prior ventures together, and then you have
Right.
somebody who, literally knows very little about dentistry other than getting his teeth cleaned, and is kind of the extent of his software knowledge is using the internet and some applications through the internet.
Right.
The knowledge between kind of the gap between me and the company itself in terms of what we needed to do and all the legacy kind of nomenclature that a business has and the norms, as you mentioned, all those things exist. And then you have almost someone coming in who has a separate set of maybe expectations or an idea of the way the business should be run based on a couple months of interacting with just a small number of people in the business. There's always going to be a sense of tension. And I think it wasn't personality by any means. I mean, I
Right.
think the nice thing
Yeah.
about it is the founder of the business was very open. Um, I think at the time we had probably of the 25 people, we had maybe met 10 of them before we had bought the business, which is pretty unique.
Yeah.
A lot of the acquisitions typically, as you know, they're a little bit shielding of the employees because they're afraid of how the employees might react. But it's an
Right.
indication of how much trust there was within the organization and how well people know each other, that there was a complete and open and transparent conversation about what was happening. So I would say it was less probably tension, more just like, who the heck are these guys? And like, why are they here? And what do they know about dentistry? And
Yeah.
what does this mean for me? And what does it mean for the company and all of those things? So it took a while to work through that, but that was probably the hardest part.
Sure. Sure. And just to kind of anchor this one aspect, which probably the audience doesn't know about, Planet DDS is a software company that is a practice management software for the dentist. Is that correct? Or
Correct. So
yeah.
think about it as kind of an EMR, EHR. So in dental, we call it
Yeah.
practice management software. So all the clinical aspects of scheduling, the billing, everything basically to run a dental office. So it's a super rich, complex software application, cloud
Hmm.
native, but focused primarily on serving what are called DSOs or larger dental groups, a corporate
Right.
dental group. So
Sure.
yeah,
Sure.
it's been a ton of time and effort and deep relationship with customers to build this application that was really great.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
and that was hard. It was hard for them to do it. So you're also walking into
Hmm.
a situation where in many ways the company and the people at the company have done the hard work in terms of
Yes.
finding and building up
That's true.
software application that has product market fit that works with those customers. And then so there's a
Yeah.
little bit of, okay, great. Like, what's this guy gonna do after we've already kind of built the software? I was a little bit nervous.
Yeah. All right. Right. And the founder stayed with you, with the company,
Yeah, he was
post
great.
acquisition.
Him and his wife both worked with the company for about 2.5 years. Actually, his wife worked with the company for probably about 4 years after. And
Yeah.
I just saw him actually a couple weeks ago, and he is very much in all ways a very kind of serial entrepreneur, excellent communicator, and I think it was coming into an organization where it was his idea and his ability. He wanted to go do his own thing, and he's been very successful in some other ventures within dental as well, and actually still works in some ways. His company works with our company in terms of software integrations and such. But yeah, he was, and it was not just him on the founding team. There were 3 or 4 people, one of them sitting right next to me, who were employees Q3 and probably 5 and 6 were all still with the company, 12
Right.
years. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty good. And seems like he was a great founder as well, because he must have developed a close-knit culture. And, you mentioned that there was a sense of trust in him. And, there was good, open, honest communication between him and the team, basically, right? So that's a great asset. And you also mentioned that potentially you had some different ideas as to what the company could become. So could you tell us a little bit about what your vision was? Well, and when you or did you have a vision as to what this kind of Planet DDS can become under your leadership?
I don't know if I had a vision before, because when you go through a diligence process, you get fed all the information that the company wants you to
Yeah.
know in order to kind of buy it, so you don't walk
Right.
away from it. So I would
Yeah.
say in the first couple of months, we wanted to grow more quickly. So the product was being used by one of the largest DSOs, or one of the largest kind of customers in the market. So one of
Yeah.
the more sophisticated folks were using the product and using it well, and they were a great reference client. And so from
Great.
my perspective, what excited me and my partner about it was the opportunity to professionalize, operationalize, do things, but also scale the go-to-market team. The company was
Yeah.
very much one sales rep. She's actually still with the company as well. But she
Uh-huh.
would go out and primarily through relationship building and kind of all of the type of brand type stuff that smaller companies do in order to sell. Word of mouth is what they say. We wanted to
Yeah.
build scale like a real go-to-market function, because we know the product was great. The support and everything was a work in progress, but typically the company very much cared and was super customer centric. The key and unlock for us was, how do we get that experience that one customer was very vocal and excited about introduced to as many other customers that needed a product? And that
Sure.
was, I don't think that was a sense of conflict at all.
Uh-huh.
It was more probably a sense of how to, because
Right.
one, that
Right.
takes capital, and two, that takes the ability to grow and scale and hire and do all those things. So it was
Yeah.
that was probably the area we were most excited about.
Well, right. I think what you're saying is that the founder's vision, your vision, actually kind of matched
Yep.
in the sense that uh, you saying that we want to grow faster. I think that's kind of what you said, and they were okay with that, meaning that okay, yeah, you're right. We can grow faster. So there was an agreement on that vision.
Yeah, definitely. Agreement on, there was two things: lack of capital. So we also came into some capital, which is
Yeah.
of course necessary
Ah.
because growth is expensive.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
it was that, and also the investments. I think it was where to invest, how to invest. Where like we have a go to market motion that's very much word of mouth, where it's very much relationship based.
Right.
To pivot
Yeah.
into one that is more like content and brand and get your message out there. It's a different set of
Yes.
skills that I think the company didn't have. So we were able to build that. I don't think there was any misalignment in terms of what everybody wanted to win and they were excited to win. I think there was probably a little bit of hesitation as to, do these guys really know how to do that? They talk a big game. They
Yes.
come in here with lots of ideas and fancy PowerPoint presentations, but show me
Yeah.
where you've
Yeah.
actually gone and scaled and grown a dental software company before, and I'll believe you. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
that kind of wait and see.
So search fund, if you can get behind the scenes on that idea a little bit, because I think a lot of people don't know what search fund is.
Mhm.
Could you tell us a little bit about how that works? Is it really an acquisition, or is it a group of people coming in and providing capital to grow, and then also coming in and taking over the management of the company?
Kind of both. So the way I think about it is,
Yeah.
if you are a single entrepreneur or usually a pair of entrepreneurs, you will raise capital from small private equity funds, family offices, or high net worth individuals, and
Right.
you're raising just a small amount of operating capital to be able to pay yourself n- immaterial, well, not immaterial, but not a
Right.
great salary for a couple of years because they want you to be hungry. And then when you go find
Yeah.
the business, you go back to the same 10 or 20 investors and you present the business to them and they provide the capital to buy it. Now, conditional upon that agreement is that the entrepreneur or entrepreneurs are then going to go run the business. So it's not a traditional like private equity fund or
Right.
traditional investment fund where you have lots of assets that you're managing a portfolio. You're really placing all of your bets into one business.
Hmm.
And the investors are very much betting on you as much as the business itself.
Right. You as in you the person. So
Yeah, as
basically,
the, as the entrepreneur. Yep.
yeah, you and your partner, basically,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. So then is there a pressure from the investment side on you to grow, or is it something that is completely driven by what the company can actually handle? Because this is a very important question. Here you have like venture-backed companies and things like that. They want companies to grow really fast. Is that the case in search fund situations?
It is. I would say
Yeah.
search fund investors are probably more patient because
Yeah.
most of the time they're betting on an entrepreneur or a pair of entrepreneurs to go run a business, but in most
Right.
cases, those entrepreneurs have never done that before. So they're not
Yeah.
hiring a professional CEO who's kind of run a playbook. It's traditionally, hey, let's go find some people that we like, that we think are capable and smart. They're
Right.
really motivated to go find a business. We're going to give them time to go figure it out. So there is, and then over time that changes because the expectation is
Hmm.
then you become a more experienced CEO and you better get your stuff
Right.
together and start growing the business. So I would
Yeah.
consider it more patient capital, but
Yes.
very much still focused on the expectation of growth and returns.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't mind, and I'm not necessarily asking for the exact numbers or anything like that, but what was the vision? So was it like double it in 5 years or something like that? What was your goal? Fairly within the, either before or after the acquisition, you said, okay, this company can grow to, whatever the number is, to 5 times the revenue in 10 years, or was it like that? Is there any financial goals that you expect?
They're traditionally return expectations. So investors, like most private equity, look for return 3 times their capital, but over a period of time. So, but
Yeah,
the thing about our business in particular is it's huge. The market's huge. Dental is enormous. It's like a $3 billion software market, and
sure.
there of it at the time we bought the business in 2015, a very small percentage of it was actually using cloud-based practice management software.
Yeah,
And so,
sure,
like, the
sure.
opportunity was fun. I mean, potentially, if you had every single dental office using our software, we would be $3 billion of revenue. We are not $3 billion of
Yeah.
revenue. But
Yes, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so I think it's more around the pace of growth is dictated less based on, I think, the timeline and the return expectations of the investors. I think it's determined somewhat based on the desire of the entrepreneur to want to continue to do it, but also what the market can absorb. So if it's a very small
Yes.
industry and you think you can double the size of the business, but the next investor is only going to be able to double it, it might be a good time to sell. But in our case, like, the sky is the limit because it's such a big market and it's still
Yeah.
so early in the transformation to a cloud product that there was never any pressure, I'd say, to sell or to
Okay.
recap.
Yeah. And so once you took over you stepped into the role of a CEO, you and your partner. So I'm assuming you CEO and co-CEO, something like a CEO and
CEO and
COO,
president, but
that
inside outside, but yeah,
CEO and
kind of
president.
running it very
Yeah.
much smoothly.
Sure, sure. So as you step in, what are some of the things that you did, the first set of steps that you took? Either just kind of trying to get the reality of the situation. Did you kind of have a meeting with them and sat down with them in small groups or large groups or with the whole company and said, hey, where are we and where do you want to go? That kind of like a powwow type of meeting, or did you actually start executing with steps like A, B, C, X, Y, Z?
So we had a 30, 60, 90-day plan, which was we threw out the window
Oh,
probably
okay.
on day 2 because it was you you do things and it never works out that way. It's like you get punched in
Yeah,
the mouth.
right, sure.
But
Yeah, yeah,
so we because the culture was so tight, we thought it was really
yeah,
important to get to know folks and for them to get to know us. So we met brought most of the people into the headquarters because they were really distributed even at that time. We sat
yeah.
in with the founder. He explained why
Mhm.
he did it. We introduced ourselves, and then we went out to dinner and we had some beers and we started to get to know each other a little bit. And I think
Sure.
the approach from a culture perspective is to be as just transparent and as honest as possible. And I
Yeah,
mean, some of the employees were, because they were very confident and knew each other, were very transparent with us and said, "Hey, what the heck do you guys know about dental? What do you know about software?" And we told them,
yeah,
as much as we've learned in the last 3 months.
yeah.
So there was really that aspect of coming in, not pretending to be someone you're not, that I think was critical in terms of building the trust in the
Right,
culture,
sure.
because it's like no
Yeah,
one expects you to be, a rock star day one in an industry, particularly in a company where people sometimes work 20 years, but they
yeah.
expect you to, like, acknowledge the fact that they have all of the experience and the knowledge and you have very little. And so, you're gonna work together to go build things. So being
Mhm.
very transparent and humble about what you know, I think was really, really critical. And I think in building those relationships, investing in time to get to know people,
Yeah,
why they enjoy what they do, like what they like about the company, to understand the strength of the culture beyond the 60 to 90 days we spent during the diligence process to really understand what makes people tick. So that was
right.
really important. I think we did. It's like, get to know their families, get to know, how they know each other, like,
Yeah,
hang out. Like,
yeah.
don't
Right.
just go to dinner and don't talk about work, for crying out loud. Just like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
tell me where you come from. Like, what do you like to do? So that was
yeah.
really important from a culture. And the second piece which I think is almost as important, actually probably more important in a lot of ways, because they're looking at you as a
Hmm.
human, but they're also
Yeah.
looking at capability in terms of being able to go and transform and grow the business. Because a culture that wants
Yeah.
to win and a company that sells typically has not been able to necessarily grow as fast. And there's a sense of acknowledgement, if not tacit acknowledgement of that. At least there's a
Sure.
understanding. So they're looking for you as a CEO to demonstrate the ability to be able to change things in ways. And so what
Yeah.
we did is we grabbed as much data as we could, like all the Salesforce data,
Hmm.
all the support data, all the stuff we could. And we started showing insights about the business based on data that people hadn't seen before. And then we
Hmm.
presented
Hmm.
and worked with people to present and create solutions to be able to solve those problems. And then we found a couple of what we call like low hanging fruit or easy wins
Yeah.
around something as simple as how do we fix how a support is delivered through the platform, and
Right.
we're able to show the ability to move things forward. And what that does is it shows you're competent. It shows you
Yeah.
want to listen and work with people about things that they know and involve them in the solution. And it also
Yeah.
shows you can move things forward. And to be able to do that, the trust building of the relationship and the competency of doing something that, fundamentally everyone knows needs to get done,
Right.
that accelerates kind of the foreign organism into the body, host body kind of analogy that a lot of people think about when
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. That's also a medical analogy, by the way, so it kinda works, right? So right. Yeah, yeah. So, and I love the way you said that, and I love the fact you said that, it's human at the end of the day. So the culture is human, right? And, you didn't rush into saying, "Hey, here's our vision, and this is where we can go. Here's the data." You took the time to get to know them,
Mhm.
and you went out and got to know each other's families or, each other personally, basically, right? And that's a very important part. And we talk often about on this podcast, and I've heard other people talk about this, which is that there's this idea of reality, right? This is where we are, and this is where we want to be. And sometimes we need to assess the reality, as in, where are we, right? Before we begin to kind of say, hey, this is where we're going to go, right? And part of the reality is getting to know the culture of the company. And you mentioned the culture multiple times. So culture obviously is very important to you personally as a CEO, right? Who comes in and does this, right? Even as you have these expectations from your investors that, hey, we need to grow, whatever that rate they expect, right? Of the growth is. So so now it's part of this process. And how did that evolve? Did you kind of there has to be some kind of an action plan that you must have formulated, right? Either together with them or on your own, and then you may have to kind of do sell it to them and get their buy-in. But was there a 1, 2, 3 step, as in, low hanging fruit, right? Support, right? Let's fix that first. Is there anything else beyond that?
So I think totally. So I think
Yeah.
if you can find the things that you can fix and insights that you don't have early on, you don't need to build
Right.
consensus about that. You kind of just go do it. You explain why. But the broader,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's two things you need to do. I think as a new CEO, you kind of need to codify and recognize, and in some cases even modify the set of values or culture. And the culture was good, but every
Right.
culture has elements of good and bad. And so
Sure.
getting
Sure.
everybody into a room and saying, "Look, what do we like about Planet DDS? Like, why have we been
Yeah.
successful?" And then an acknowledgement about maybe we haven't been as successful as we could have been because of these things.
Yeah.
And so we start
Right.
thinking about things like, our core values and all those things. We're
Sure.
collaborative, we're empathetic, we're trustworthy, we're accountable. There are
Yeah.
elements of that, like within the company 10 years ago, that were great, and there are things that needed to be improved. So I think you need to have a shared story or a shared kind of understanding of
Yeah.
culture itself and why it works and why it doesn't. And then that is a hard thing to get to because there's a lot of preconceived
Yes.
notions and disagreement about, like, I come in as a outsider with very little experience and have a perspective of what's not working, which
Yeah.
versus people who think, hey, this is what I've been doing for 10 years and I'm still on
Yeah.
the job and things are going great. Um,
Right.
and so I think building that sense of core values, mission, like the mission, purpose, values, kind of all of those type of things was really critical. And it's not just a single conversation. It's a conversation you have then, and it's a hash out, then it's a revisit and it's a check in and, weeks later and month. And then you get to a point where
Yeah.
not everyone's going to align to it, but you have enough alignment that you think you can use it and it can start to be the narrative of the company itself. So that's the critical aspect. I think it's more important than any kind of strategic planning. Then when
Yes.
you have that, I think the strategic planning has to be consensus driven. So you have to sit and through, and we did something very early on. I think we refined where we actually call it the Apollo mission, which is the 5 or 6 things in a year that we really want to do.
Hmm.
Problem is like every company has 20 things it could do, and a lot
Yeah.
of that 20 things that are probably are good ideas it could do, but you can only
Right.
do a number of them. And so when you
Sure.
define what that is and you get alignment on those, when anybody brings an idea and is like, "Hey, look, I thought it would be great if we went and maybe we should use our software and go, sell it to vets for people for dogs to clean their teeth." And we say, "Wait a second, is that one of our Apollo mission items?"
Yeah.
If not, then it's easy to
Right.
be like, "Let's talk about that next year. Let's put that in the parking lot." So um,
Yeah.
that aspect of things. Then over time, the strategic planning, like the goal setting and all those things, that's a bit of a muscle memory and a kind of or a bit of a muscle that the company needs to learn to exercise because it hasn't done that before. You can't get
Right.
20 people in a room and suddenly be like, what are the core KPIs we need to drive to? Like, what's our top line growth? What's profitability look like?
Right.
It takes some education and some things as to what those things probably mean and matter to the business. But over time, you
Yeah.
can broadening that conversation. It becomes a little bit more less, hey, look, what are we going to do and what are the big things we want to achieve? And then it becomes more around the planning and the specifics about what we're going to do to get there, which is something that happens.
Yeah, yeah. And something that I really want to dig into a little bit is this process where you said the value, mission, purpose, right? And the vision, that you had this conversation with them about this. And this is such an important conversation, especially for someone who is stepping in from outside, right? With this company that's a little tightly woven with each other, right? They're really tight with each other. And so, if you were to advise someone who is stepping into a role, as maybe acquiring a company and they have an existing culture, and then you need to deal with them, and then you need to kind of bring them into your own culture, what would be one or two things that you would say to them in terms of what to do and what not to do when you're trying to build this kind of, I'm going to use the word consensus, around this idea of vision and mission and values and those kinds of things?
I think the most important thing is to let people speak. So I think
Ah,
everybody has a
yeah,
preconceived list of what a company's values should be. I mean, you can pull them out
right,
of Netflix or any of those famous ones in the deck where they,
right,
I can just pick those 5. Those
yeah,
are all like every company should get.
yeah, yeah,
But it's
yeah,
instead of that, the company it has a culture. And that culture
yes,
needs to be articulated by the people who built the culture. And you
yeah,
can't
yeah,
in some of those things, like you're gonna hear like, "Oh, we're super accountable." And you're gonna think, "Well, 2 weeks ago you said you were gonna do this, but you didn't do that." So I don't think that necessarily right
yeah,
now mind, but you can't be dismissive of that. If accountability is something
yes,
that the culture believes and the people think it has, you can't necessarily be like, "That's not us." You have to say, "Okay,
yeah,
that's what we
yeah,
all care about." And then how do we then demonstrate the ability to live up to that expectation? Because
right,
so it is I think the first iteration of your core values is almost more a reflection of the company with a little bit of influence and almost prescriptive aspect of what is a CEO. You want to make sure you communicate what you don't, but it's not
right,
your values. It's not you
yeah,
putting your imprint on the company itself. Because if you try to do that, it'll come across as fake. It'll come across as
yes,
pushy. It'll come across as from you and not something that's organic.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, 100%. And is it a consensus though, or is it some kind of a give and take? Is it some kind of a compromise? Is it negotiation? Is it any one of those things,
I think
or
it's
something else?
That's a great question. I think it has. I mean, this is an interesting debate. I think it depends very much on the culture. It depends on the amount of good versus bad in the culture that you step into.
Right.
Because if the culture is
Yeah.
mostly good, but inevitably it will have some bad characteristics, or maybe some people that don't necessarily live up to what you want in the culture, which is
Right.
solvable in other ways than just redefining the culture. I
Yeah.
think it needs to be probably less of a negotiation and more of a, hey, look, I'm not sure. I know we all believe that we're accountable, or I know we all believe we're
Right.
ambitious, but
Yeah.
but here are some examples. And I think you do that more through a definition of who the aspirational aspect of who people want to be, and then the
Right.
communication that you have with the people about how they're either meeting those expectations or not. So if ambition
Yeah.
is one of the values that everyone thinks that the company should have or does have, and maybe you as a CEO don't see the ambition as much as you're ambitious, then I think you can
Yeah.
still define ambition as being a core value or kind of an ideal of the company. And then when you have your one-on-ones with your direct reports, you can refer back to, hey, look, we all said ambition was a core kind of value of ours. Here are 3 things
Yeah.
in the couple of weeks that I've noticed that don't really meet that expectation. And it helps kind of that. Then people will either, if they don't agree with you or they don't like it, they'll self-select out, which is unnecessarily
Sure.
is oftentimes a necessary aspect of culture change, or they'll
Yeah.
jump forward and they'll start to adjust their behavior to meet the expectations you want. But I wouldn't, but of the give and take, like I wouldn't compromise. I wouldn't let a company come with anything on that list of core values initially that you don't fundamentally agree are good things. Um,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
if they had said, look, we just sell at any cost and like we just were really aggressive, like I would have said that's not the company that I think we should be, and we would have talked about it. But thankfully in this case, all of them were good virtues of a company, even if we didn't live up to them 100%. It wasn't super hard in terms of the give and take.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And when was the time or was there a time when you said, okay, this is starting to gel now, that this give and take is resulting into something, it's crystallizing, and we have something real here, something solid. Was there a moment, or was it like a series of moments where that you can't kind of pinpoint?
It's a great question. I think I can think of two specific instances where it really kind of done. One
Uh-huh.
is
Sure.
the ability to bring other people into an organization. So if you grow,
Yeah.
if your expectation is to grow, you always have to bring new talent. You have to bring in people with different skills. And
Right.
I think the ability to do that and bring people in that fit the culture, and then have the people, sometimes that were hired over or were not necessarily promoted into that role, even though they wanted to be, still
Sure.
understand
Yeah.
why the person you brought in is the right cultural flag bearer, and also the
Yeah.
competency you have like that. That is fundamentally the sign of a strong culture, when you can bring people into an organization and they're still excited. They love the culture, they love the company, they want to win,
Hmm.
but they have acknowledgement that, look, if we're going to be ambitious, we need to bring
Yeah.
somebody in with these skills, and right now you don't have those skills, but you can learn from this person, and then maybe you grow within the company, or maybe even you take those skills and you try it at a different company, and we'd be super supportive of you doing that. But if you have the culture around ambition, for example, being a core value, it makes
Yeah.
those situations like possible. Whereas a lot of times people
Sure.
just leave and it's like, oh, I didn't get hired in that position, I'm gonna go find something.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was one value, or one or two, three, whatever you can? It was 10 years ago, so you probably don't remember all of it. But what were the values that kind of came to the surface? I think you mentioned ambition a few times. So I don't
Yep.
know if that's one of the values, but if there are others.
That one came later. So, the company was very
Ah,
collaborative. So they worked really
yeah,
well together, and indicative of the fact they all knew each other. But there wasn't a lot of
yeah,
there was already I mean, there's good conflict and good debate internally, but there wasn't any of the
yeah.
kind of sense of like ownership and, hey, that's not my job kind of stuff. Everyone would pitch in to try to do things, and they'd help each other
Right,
out. So that was the first thing that was
right.
great. Desire to win.
Yeah,
So there was ambition, but maybe not quite in the definition of ambition that you and I might think in terms of willing to do. They really wanted to
sure.
win, but not everyone, I think,
Yeah.
really wanted to do what it took to win. And then they were super customer centric. The company was
Ah,
very, very focused on the customer. And like that is a very secret, that's secret sauce that is a very, very tenuous, valuable trait that the company needs to have that can change on a dime. There wasn't a lot of
yeah,
blaming the
yeah.
customers, like, when the customer needed help, like, people would pitch in and go get it done. I wouldn't say it was always the most scalable, and sometimes we actually overserved and did things we probably shouldn't have done without getting paid for it. But, like,
Right.
that was a fantastic, value of the culture that I think we've continued to nurture to this day.
Absolutely. And you mentioned go to market, and was that culture there in the beginning, or was is it something that's an element that you had to bring in as your perspective as a CEO, being able to sell. So going from service to sales is, especially in professional. And I work with a lot of
Mhm.
professional companies, and this happens to be a bit of a sticking point for them. Okay, they love to service the customer, but sales is sometimes is a four-letter word, right? I don't want to
Love
do
it.
it, kind of thing. Did you have any of that kind of pushback or anything like that as you begin to build out the go-to-market or sales organization?
So, not really, because I think we were always from day one, and I think it's indicative of the person that I brought on to and my
Yeah,
partner who was running sales.
right.
We were very honest. So one of our core values was transparency and
Yeah,
trustworthiness. Like we never oversold. In some cases, to our detriment, we would actually say, "Look, the software doesn't do this." And so I think
right.
where you see conflict like that, where you've got a very kind of servant, kind of customer centric organization, and then you try to go sell. Oftentimes the go-to-market team sometimes promises things that this services team
Right.
can't deliver. We didn't have that problem
Yeah.
as much. It was more like, how do we actually, I think we were in some ways a little bit, not reticent, but maybe unwilling to brag a bit as much as
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
have in terms of, hey, let's
Sure.
go ask the
Right.
customer for a testimonial or a white paper, or we've
Yeah.
got really loud and well-respected customer that's used the software that's grown 5,000%. Let's ask them to actually go tell other people that might be looking for a solution how great it was to work with us. And I think the company did that informally, but we took those experiences and then we brought a new customer on and we replicated it to a point where our brand expanded. And it was really powerful from that perspective. So, I mean, I don't think we've really had
Yeah.
a very aggressive sales culture in that sense, but how to do
Right.
that, how to do that at scale, and how to market it, where to put it, how to say it,
Yeah.
all those things are
Yeah.
just a skill the company didn't have.
Sure. And I'm assuming you also probably ended up hiring some folks from
Yep.
to build out their organization, right?
Yep. We were one
The-
at the time when my partner Blake, I think we were two salespeople. Today
uh-huh.
we are on the revenue team, so maybe three on the. I think we were three people on the go-to-market team, the whole revenue team, sales and marketing. Today I think we're
Right.
75. So,
Wow. Okay.
and
Yeah.
made a very very gentleman who's our CRO right now made a very good
Yeah.
hire early on. Who's a friend and has been amazing and has scaled that team from where it was to where it is today. And is a
Yeah.
very,
Yeah.
very good, and we talk a little bit about culture and how you amplify that, and I know we'll talk a little bit about that throughout an organization when it grows. But he was an example of somebody who was very, very strong, very aligned in terms of the culture we wanted to build, and has built
Yeah.
in some ways his own kind of subset of an aligned culture within the revenue team that fits super well within the broader organization.
Absolutely. Sure. And I mean, this is where the growth came from. I'm assuming that you built that slowly. So what was your first win in terms of the execution together, in this role where and everything came together, they were on board with you, and things started to kind of come together in terms of execution.
So one execution, I'll tell a story in that sense. So we had that customer I mentioned, he was the biggest referenceable, it was like 15 to 20% of our revenue. So it was a big customer. We were a
Yeah.
small 25-person business, but that
Sure.
customer was then acquired by a much bigger customer that did something similar. And
Uh-huh.
that customer that acquired our customer at the time was using a different software application. And so, of
Yeah.
course, the moment
Yeah.
we found out about it, we're like, oh man, they have 300 offices. They're gonna convert their 65 offices that we have on our software to the software they're using.
Right.
But what we were able to
Yeah.
do as a team, and this was very much a team effort, all the way from sales to our professional services to support to the founder to me, we all rallied together and put a plan together to go convince that customer who didn't want to use the software they were using that the
Right.
65 location customer was using the right software. And so we leveraged the
Hmm.
customer who, again, was very supportive of us and has a great reputation in dental to be able to
Sure.
kind of be a convincing agent within the organization about, hey, look, this has been great. I've grown with the software. And so when we were able to land that customer, which is
Yeah.
today probably one of the top 10 largest dental organizations in the country, still one of our customers, it kind of put us on the
Yeah.
map. It put us on the map and it showed our
Yes.
ability to all have kind of a stretch goal or pie in the sky,
Yeah.
objective and get together to meet it in a way that the company probably couldn't have before. And I think that was a massive successful inflection point in our proving our ability
Sure.
to do it.
Yeah. And when did that happen? Was that a number of years into
That was
this
maybe a
partnership?
year and a half after we bought the business, so it wasn't long. So
Oh
it
wow.
was,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
a oh no moment when it's like we're gonna lose 15 to 20% of our revenue with one of our largest customers, but we were able to see it through.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And what did that do to the culture? Was that also an inflection point in terms of your leadership style and the culture coming around to see what the company can do, kind of thing? As in, until that point, it's all ideas and things like that, right? But
Mhm.
when something gels and happens in the marketplace in terms of the dollar values and growth and things like that. So what did that do to the culture of the company?
I think it instilled a sense of confidence. So,
Yeah.
small companies, traditionally, like, and we had one large customer, 65 locations. So it was, what is a small customer, but we really
Yeah.
had one.
Yeah.
I think nobody really in the company all felt like a very small player within the dental space in terms of, hey, look, they have one very vocal and loyal customer and the rest of a very small kind of, are very small dental groups. And so the ability
Yeah.
to be able for someone in the larger customer to be able to put their faith in running their business using our software application. And we are every word of mission critical. Like, our software goes down, you can't see patients. Like, you have to,
Yes.
for them to bet on a company our size at that time was a massive confidence boost and sense of like a sense of trust that they had in us. And I think it did. It kind of gave the culture and the company a sense of what's possible. If we can go get those guys to use the software, convince them, and our product's that great, then what's to keep us from going and signing up 5 other folks that look like them and really growing the
Yeah.
business aggressively? So it was almost like a proof of concept or a sense of acknowledgement that the company was kind of had arrived.
Absolutely. And here you are, you have 350 employees today and a strong sales organization, go-to-market team. What is your vision today going forward?
Yeah, it's
You personally, yeah.
personally, or is it for the company?
Well, I was going to separate the two, and then I was going to ask you if if you agree on them or not. But take it the way you like it, personally or as a company.
So I'll start as a company. So
Yeah.
I think it's a massively exciting time to be in dental, and a really interesting time to be on the dental software
Uh
provider
huh.
side of the equation. So
Yeah.
dental is still early in its cloud adoption, and it's
Uh,
consolidating. And the
right.
consolidators, which are our customers, they really benefit
Right.
from having an enterprise grade cloud based system of record software application because it
Sure.
allows them to control things centrally and do all the things they need to do. So it still feels really, really early in that story. And we've
Yeah.
now, at this point, we work with over half of the top 60 largest customers in dental, where we had
Wow.
one before. So we've grown, and we've
That's
cemented, I
amazing.
think, our reputation into that market, which is interesting and exciting and all different types of things. And with the advent
Yeah.
of artificial intelligence and some other things that are happening related to agentic and some of the technology that I
Yeah.
think may over time actually solve some of the major frustration points in dental, I think it's a
Right.
really cool place and kind of at the precipice of really cool innovation that's going to allow us to do things. So I don't think I've ever been more excited about the prospects of the company itself. From myself personally, I think that does align. I mean, it's interesting, and when you think about culture and you think about the stages of a company's growth and your role as a CEO, it changes, right? When you're 25
Right.
employees, like, you know everybody, you know some of their families, like you hang out on the weekends, like go to
Yeah.
baseball games, you
Yeah.
do things. Then the company grows, you do
Yeah.
a couple acquisitions, you kind of start over and build and bring people that you've acquired into the fold and see if they're, going to make it or fit the culture, or see if they're going to, how it's going to work, and bring two cultures together,
Yeah.
which is massively complex. And now
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
350 employees, where I spend most of the time with probably 10 key people in the organization, which is
Yes.
different. And
Yeah.
they become
Yeah.
friends, and there's a team, and we
Yeah.
spend a lot of time together, but you're less into the building aspects of the details and actually focused on the projects that you were when you were trying to fix support day like 2, where you're like, we have 1,000
Yeah.
support tickets open and we're using this very antiquated software application. Like, what do we go use and solve that so that the customer experience is better? Now it's more like you're talking to somebody in a one-on-one, and they're updating in terms of like, what are the progress towards specific goals and tasks, and how do you think about alignment across teams? How do you communicate? How do you make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable as an organization?
Yeah.
Different. So I like both. I often wonder like which I'm better at, which of those 2 CEO
Uh-huh.
roles. But it's exciting. I think it's a challenge. Every day, the company is the biggest company I've ever run. I always say that to
Uh,
our board. It's like, I'm learning as we go, and I remain
yeah.
humble, and there's lots of things I could do better. But yeah, it's a pretty exciting time.
Humility is so important. Yeah. Yes. Something that we talk about a lot on this podcast is, this idea of a self-sustaining or self-sustainable organization, so that, we talk about founders a lot, where the founder can build a company that they can step away from, not necessarily just run away from it or anything like that, or, not abdicate or anything like that. But it's more like, the ability to step back and the company can still run. Right. So going from the hero who saves the day to having an infrastructure where you can step back and other people can be the heroes and they can save the day, and all the decision making and everything is happening. They also have the context that you always carry in your head as the
Yep.
leader, right? So that they can make the right kinds of decision, do what they need to do to take the company to wherever it needs to go. So w- where are you in that, on that spectrum, if there is such a thing? For example, the idea of being able to step away from it and have the organization still continue without your input as the leader. or you having there to help make the decisions?
That is a great question. So I focus on it all the time.
Uh
I
huh.
think there's an
Sure.
old saying that you want to make yourself irrelevant as a CEO, and
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
some truth to that because I think you're investing in obviously the team's ability to make those decisions. Like as you mentioned, their decision making consistent with not only what your objectives are and understanding of what those are, but also kind of how it impacts across functionally. Because I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Leaders get
Right.
very geeked to what they do, but then understanding how to think about the impacts of their decisions on other departments when they're not doing that, where in a lot of
Right.
ways, that's kind of the CEO's job is to make sure there's alignment and those things are like
Yeah.
there's collaboration between those two. So I think there's a little bit of an investment you make in your team intentionally to kind of expose them to that, to get them to a point where they're thinking bigger than just what their own P&L or their own department cares about.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
but I think it is, we're pretty far along on that journey, I would say. And
That's
I wouldn't
good.
like to say I'm irrelevant. I'm probably sometimes annoying, but in terms of my desire to be involved in certain things that I think probably the team,
Yeah.
why is Eric on this call on like a product call when it comes to like one specific thing? But I
Right.
enjoy that. I like getting involved. I like kind of sometimes every once in a while stirring the pot or making the sausage myself as opposed to doing that because I think it's fun. It makes you feel alive and also
Yeah.
adds some value, but hopefully. But,
Right.
it very much I think that is the job, particularly when you start to get to our scale. It's like, how do you think about not just key man risk because, not heaven forbid something happened to me or I need to do something else
Yeah.
or those things, but it's important. There needs to be succession and there needs to be a good group of a team that can go and execute in your absence. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's so much better to have that. As I mean, when you think about succession and you think about culture and you think about
Yeah.
like, there's 2 ways the transition happens. Either like, CEO leaves, new CEO comes in, which sometimes is
Yes.
necessary for lots of reasons because, like, things aren't happening or maybe things have gotten stale and you need a fresh perspective, but it's risky because it's so much better when a business is performing is that you have leaders within the organization that step up, wanna take more responsibility, and learn how to lead, not only just, like, their teams and their function, but lead the overall organization in a way that they've never really been exposed to.
Absolutely. And those are words of gold because yes, leaders, there has to be a culture of people who can step into the leadership roles and can lead, right? With the context that you would share with them, they will own that context and make the decisions off of that.
Yep.
And while we're on the topic a little bit, sometimes our audience, one of the things that I hear often is, functionally dividing an organization. It's went so really quickly. I just want to spend a couple of minutes on this. How do you functionally organize your company today? Is it, you normally always have, your operations and sales and marketing and those kinds of things. So, and you said there's 10 people that you probably manage directly. You are a 350 employee company today. So, what is the number of direct reports that you can handle at one time? And what are the functional responsibilities? If you can just kind of give a quick one on that,
Yeah, that's
primer,
it.
basically.
I think that's shitty. So, I probably have 7
Yeah,
direct reports, not 10, but probably
sure.
work pretty closely with 3 of the other direct reports who are critical to
All right.
business. So, I don't think you can have 10 direct reports and be an effective leader. I think you're span of control depending on the
Yeah,
strength of those people and, obviously,
right.
different leadership and management styles differ based on where they are on their leadership and management journey and how much time you have to spend investing in, directing versus supporting versus delegating. And so I think all of
Sure.
that matters. So it depends on the strength of the team. But I think it's an interesting question because I think the world is changing and I think it is
Mm,
changing.
yeah,
And we are traditionally structured, like you mentioned. We have go to market, we've got post sales, we've
right.
got product, we have engineering, we have finance and G&A and HR. It's just your traditional kind of like software organizational structure. But what I think is
Yeah,
becoming much more effective is the notion of these tight pods of cross-functional teams.
yeah,
Which is really, really good because I think it can be really effective. There's a real sense of like collaboration and but they have to be targeted towards specific problems. Uh,
yes,
an example for us is we have a specific we do integrated payments. So we have software, but within that software, we provide the ability to swipe a credit card or pay online and do all those things. And it's kind of an add-on product, but it's critical to the workflows of the business. And but
sure.
within that, there's like a sales aspect, there's a support aspect, there's like an account management part. There's even some technical and product stuff. And so like all those individual functions work independently within the payments function it's very, they
Sure.
working on things, but they all have a lot of priorities that run up through their functional organization, like marketing or sales. So if you put them together and they work together towards a common goal, which is driving payments adoption or growing payment volume, payment processing volume, you can see a lot. You can
Right.
see the magic happen.
Yeah.
You can see them working together, solving problems, bringing their
Hmm.
expertise in ways that aren't traditional kind of organization, and allows you to flatten the organization, which is
Yeah.
massively critical. And a thing I worry about tremendously as we grow. It's like the aspects of middle management. Middle management is the death of motivation in some ways. Like you got folks who are just whose job it is to make sure you do your job, and it's like, do you really need that? What you need is to find motivated people with enough governance and insight as to whether or not they're being effective to be able to be managed effectively. But you don't need
Sure.
the middle management structure is kind of dying. So
Yeah.
I think the companies in the future will maybe structured entirely different, and I think it will be to the benefit if they're.
Absolutely. And something that we haven't talked too much about, we kind of talked about the vision and progression and things like that. Something that we deal with a lot, all business owners, business leaders, is how to make the tough decisions, tough calls, right? What was the 10 years, this 10-year span of management with Planet DDS? What was the hardest thing that you had to do in terms of building the culture that is more aligned to the kinds of things that you're doing today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's all. The one that jumps to mind is the hardest decision when you've got really really good people who care a ton and work really hard, but aren't necessarily the people. And in some cases, you can hire folks and they can nurture and they grow. But when you have particularly like executives, you can't hire an executive or an executive, and they're oftentimes expensive. And so you have to make
Yeah,
some decisions about, is that person the right person, even when they're a friend. And if you're going to, like if our core values are ambition and accountability, if that person's not successful in the role or doesn't have the skills to be successful, that is by far
yeah,
the hardest. But it is a decision you have to make as a CEO.
yes,
Because everybody
yeah,
sees they love that person. They're like, "Oh, that person's
yeah,
friends with the CEO." But, like, if that person isn't successful, like, the lowest
yeah,
common denominator on a team, everybody just ends up basically performing to it. So you have to make some very, like, those have been the hardest and most probably important decisions that I made, but I think it's
yeah,
you absolutely have to.
yeah, yeah. And a tough question that it may be a tough question, maybe it's not. In the hindsight, every time people say, "Oh, I can't let go, I can't let," and someone basically someone is not performing, quote unquote performing, right? That doesn't mean that that person is not a low performer by definition, but in this organization they're not working out, and I have to let them go. And people are waffle. And I've seen all kinds of leaders. They're the great leaders. They are tough, but firing or letting people go is never ever the easiest thing to do, right? How do you do it? What are some of the things that you can say that you could do to make it easier? It's never easy, easier on both you and them.
I think if you have done your job and your job there's two things in a team. I think you have to build a relationship, and there has to be trust. You have to be able to give feedback openly and honest, constructive feedback. Then I don't think
Yes.
it's ever a surprise. Like, if it's a surprise and
Yeah.
something legitimately, I mean, it's always a shock, right? If you have those conversations and it's like,
Right.
"Hey, look, like, it's not working out. We gotta make a change."
Yeah.
Um, but in the situation, if you built that relationship, like, the person that you're party ways with will understand,
Yeah.
and will know that your fundamentally job is to have the company's best interest in mind and won't take it as personally, and also will have gotten enough feedback to know that things aren't working well. So it's not as if everything is rosy and then suddenly you're like, "Hey, dude, you're not the guy who's gonna take us to the next level." And I think the thing that I think makes it easier, if there is something that makes it easier, is that I think everybody has like a sweet spot at an organization at a level in which they're going to be happy. And I think when people are not successful and they know they're not successful, they're generally not happy. Like, they may love the company, they love the culture, but the right people, and this is 95% of the people I think are fit this characteristic, they want to win and they want to do the right thing. So if they're
Right.
not successful, you're almost providing them an opportunity, and you should offer help and an ability to kind of place them and be a reference and be honest with the reference calls, but go out and do those things to get them into a position where they are going to be successful. And it's sad because you don't get to work with them, and they don't get to work with your friends
Yeah.
anymore. And you don't get to work in a cool company that maybe is growing where they spend time. But I think
Yeah.
over the long term, they realize that it's the right thing for them and they're going to be a lot happier. And there's nothing to say they can't go develop those skills at another organization. And then, I mean, we haven't hired people back, but we would, who come back
Yeah.
and say, "Look, I went and did this here." And it's like, "Dude, I love you. you're so much fun to work with. You're a friend. Like you fit the culture super
Right.
well. Now that you have the
Yeah.
skills, come back and see if we can't make it work. So, but it's hard. It is by far the hardest in meeting.
Yes. Yeah. Anything, Eric, that you wanted to say or about, especially the things that we talked about in terms of building cultures and changing cultures and building it to the level that in your example, what you built, or anything else that you wanted to say but didn't have a chance to say?
I would say so. I think the one thing we didn't touch on that I think is really a critical skill and hard to do is how you scale the culture. Like how
Yeah.
when you're 20, we talked a little bit about, but when you're 25 employees, you know everybody, like you know what people are doing on a day basis. Like you kind of know who's like meeting the mark, not just from a performance standpoint, but from the company you want to build. Like this person is the person that it really is a planeteer in our case is what we call them. But when you start to get to 350 employees, that's really, really hard. And so like we
Yeah.
hire people all the time. And so how do you understand very quickly whether the person you hire, and hiring is really, really hard, as we all know, like we all make
Right.
mistakes.
Sure.
Like how do you know that that person is going to fit the culture? Because I think it doesn't cultures are fragile, super important, sensitive things. And where you introduce enough bad people into the culture, it can ruin all the good. And so you have to
Yes.
make sure that the culture is strong enough to withstand that. The culture in some ways is almost uncomfortable for people who don't meet the culture so that they self-select out quickly, or you can see pretty quickly
Yeah.
that they're not performing. But all those things matter. So you bring in a couple of like particularly high performers that are bad culture actors. Like how do you
Right.
do that when you get to employee 350? And I used to interview even up to probably maybe 100 employees. I would interview every person we hired. And I would get a
Really.
sense it'd just be a 15-minute interview. I'd get on the phone and I'd be like, what do you want out of life? And what's exciting about this job? And like, how do you think about you're gonna do this for a long, hopefully for a couple of years at least? And like, why are you excited about doing it and why us? And it was a really great opportunity to get a sense of who's who. And now you can't do that. And so what you have to do, I think, is really just understand like all as far down in the organization as you can, like who is a planeteer in our case, like who really can identify that skill or that sense of like shared values and personality and all the values that we have in somebody that we hire and trust that person to be able to course correct quickly if we make mistakes. And like in
Yes.
addition to being able to be good kind of communicators of the core values, and there are ways you can do that centrally by recognizing people on all hands calls, or we send 4 people every year to our president's club. This year they went to Jamaica, who we
Uh-huh.
it's every month they call, and then we all vote on, and we send. So, like, there are ways to reward and reinforce that centrally, but fundamentally, a culture is best administered, evaluated, and delivered at the smallest kinda level, most local level. And so
Right.
really figuring out those are the people that are fundamentally setting the culture. Like, you as a CEO, you can get on a call, you can talk about those things, and it matters, you should. But those are the
Yeah.
people that are
Yeah.
having the conversations, like, at the happy hour in the corner or, over
Yeah.
teams that you don't see about the company, and those are
Right.
the people that you really need to make sure about it.
I think what he's saying, Eric, is that you need to have some identify some people within the organization who are knowledgeable about the kinds of values that you hold dear.
Well,
They're aligned, like you are. But there is a number of people within the organization who can go out and recruit other people, or at least talk to people and make sure that the people who are getting recruited share those values and they're aligned with the organization's
yeah.
values and system.
I think it's almost the
Is that
latter is almost more important. It's identifying, and you
yeah?
almost make it sound like you're
Ah,
a bunch of culture moles, but it is almost like that.
yeah,
A bunch of folks who
yeah,
are almost like, they are barometers, I would say, like measuring folks
yeah,
through and
yeah,
understand where things are wrong and like where situations
yes,
that are culturally inconsistent with what you want. And then it helps
absolutely,
you remain informed. And as you scale, it's the most uncomfortable thing. CEOs are all
yeah,
control freaks, the good ones are. And so as you get to
yeah,
larger things, you have to kind of trust and you have to be able to focus your efforts and time on making sure that the culture that you want
yeah.
to build sustains, even though you don't know everybody.
Absolutely. And I think what you're also saying is that these are not necessarily functional positions that you assign. These are the folks that you
Yeah, no, they're
identify.
informal.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they're the ones who are like, playing basketball on the pickup games, and they're the ones that are going to the
Yeah.
happy hours, and they're the ones who are reinforcing and encouraging people in the teams channels, and they're the ones who just like they're the ones who really care about the company and really
Yeah.
appreciate the values and the culture the company has, and so every
Yeah.
once in a while you pull them aside. It's like, hey, tell me about this guy we hired. Like, what do you think?
Hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
helpful tool to be able to keep a pulse on what's going on.
100%. That's a nugget of gold. And so that's one of the many takeaways from this conversation. So thank you so much, Eric. Who is the person that's most important for you to get in touch with right now, the archetype of the person? And how do they get in touch with you? Or what are some of the best ways for them to find out where you are and connect with you?
Sure. So you can email me at first initial last name. I think it'll be on the podcast. So probably easier that you write it down than me spell it.
We'll write it down.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
reach out directly, and anybody who's interested in entrepreneurship, any CEOs or leaders that want to chat, I'm on LinkedIn, fairly active on LinkedIn,
Perfect.
and we
Yeah.
obviously, we're pretty active, obviously in the DSO and the orthodontia space, and anybody who doesn't know about our software, who's interested in learning more about Denticon, Aptrix, or Cloud9, just give a holler. We'd love to show it to you.
Absolutely. And I have a dentist appointment in a couple of weeks, and I'll be
Nice.
sure to mention our conversation.
See how they're using it.
No,
Top with that. So we do have a very rich referral program, my friend.
oh, good. There you go. Yay. All right. So referral program. And yes, and I'll look into that. And thank you so much, Eric, for being on the show. We'll put all the contact information in our show notes so that people are aware of getting hold of you. But this is a great conversation, and you shared so much. And I think this will be a very, very valuable conversation for people to tune into and listen to and find out more about what you do.
Hey, but thanks for having me. This was a ton of fun.